Good evening, everyone. Let's make a start. Excuse me. It's not the start we wanted, Director Bo, was it? It's 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 14th of May, 2024. I want to welcome one and all to tonight's agenda briefing meeting at the City of Canning. I declare the meeting open now at 6 p.m. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and also pay our respects to elders, both past and present. In accordance with City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with a forum to ask questions of the City's administration and to receive answers to those questions to enable informed decision-making by Council at the following week's ordinary Council meeting, which will be next Tuesday, the 21st of May. And agenda briefings are not a decision-making forum. Questions may be asked and answered, but there is to be no debate or further discussion. And questions must specifically relate to an item on tonight's agenda. Elected members and employees must disclose any financial, proximity or partiality interest they have in an item and declare the interest at the commencement of the briefing or at the latest when the item is about to be discussed. Financial proximity and impartiality interest must be disclosed in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act as they apply to council meetings. Elected members disclosing a financial or proximity interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and must leave the room whilst the item is under discussion. Agenda briefings are public meetings and information provided to the meeting is publicly accessible. Can I ask everybody present here this evening, especially those in the public gallery, to please turn off your mobile phones or at least put them on silent for the duration of the briefing. This briefing is being live streamed via the City's YouTube channel. As far as attendance at item 2, I'm pleased to see that the full council is here this evening, save Councillor Parkinson, who is on leave of absence approved by council at a previous OCM. We also have disclosures of interest. I'll ask the CEO, have we received any disclosures of interest, CEO, at item 3?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've received no disclosures of interest for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Question time for the public. And in relation to responses to previous questions taken, responses to questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda. At item 4.2, questions from the public, the time set aside for public question time is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to items listed on the agenda. The City has received one question for tonight's meeting, and public question time will start now at 3 minutes past 6. From Wing Yai with regards to item IE 012 of 24. The resident is not attending the meeting and I've been requested to read the questions. There are 3. The first question, which will be responded to by Director Warren Bowe, is according to the agenda, the temporary item 69, it states that temporary parking restrictions were in place in November 2023. We live in Tansall Place and we did not notice this had been enforced. If it has been enforced, it doesn't seem to be working as parents just want to park on verge or near to the school, especially during a rainy or hot summer day. I've seen so many near misses, dangerous parking and inconsiderate drivers. During school pickups, I cannot even get in or leave my driveway as drivers are blocking us in. What can we do about that, Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Enforcement certainly is one of the tools that's available to the City in administering the parking restrictions, but the demand for parking around schools does cause a short period of congestion and often leads to inappropriate parking. Parking issues that occur around all schools are attended to on a regular basis by the City's Ranger. If the issue persists, our transport team will undertake a more broader review of the issues. If inappropriate parking is blocking driveways and access to properties, the City's Rangers can be contacted to attend the location as soon as possible.
Thank you, Director. The second question from the resident says, we are happy with the proposal, which is good news, isn't it, Director Bowe? And we want to know when this will be implemented. We also think that the restrictions should apply to the corners of the streets as there is a lot of irresponsible parking at these locations. Director.
Mr Mayor, if Council supports the implementation of the restrictions as part of this report, the changes will be implemented within 20 days of the Council resolution. As an aside, no stopping restrictions at all times are currently already in place on the corners of Tansall Place and Concrage Way.
And in fact, it's a breach of the Road Traffic Act to park within a certain meterage of a road corner. So legally, people can't park there anyway, and we would, or the police would, enforce that. The third question, I believe, is there a third question? No, that's it. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the public gallery before we move on? Thanks, everybody. I'll close public question time now. Thank you very much. The time being 6:05 p.m. At item 4.3 on tonight's agenda, which is deputations, there are none. Items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public gallery, there are none. Reports of committee meetings at item 6, there are none. The first of the reports at item 7, the Office of the CEO, Mr. Michael Littleton. There are no reports from that directorate this evening. The first report to be tabled is item 7.2. The director responsible is Ms. Lorraine Driscoll, the Director of Corporate and Commercial. And before I start, report CC010 of 24, proposed differential rating for 2024-25, was listed in the agenda as a late report. However, this report has not been included with the AB agenda. Staff are still making final preparations for it. Information relating to the report will be circulated to elected members tomorrow, and the report and all attachments will be included in the ordinary council meeting agenda published on Friday of this week, in plenty of time for Tuesday's OCM. The next report is CC009 of 24, the monthly financial report for March 2024. The officer's recommendation, councillors, is on screen, and the recommendation is also on page 7 of tonight's agenda. Do I have any questions in relation to that item? Thank you. We shall move to item 7. Councillor Bain, sorry.
No problem, Mr. Mayor. Page 14, just referring to section 18, overspend in parks and environment. $95,000 for additional maintenance costs for our nature-based playgrounds. I understand there's been some issues with timber framework. Can the city elaborate on what that $95,000 has been, how it's been used?
I'll get Director Bowe to respond to that. Director Bowe, can you shed any light on that? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can provide a more detailed summary of the activities, Councillor Bain, but obviously those timber-based elements require oiling and for protection from the weather and weatherproofing over time, and that given our significant effort in playground renewal over the last few years, we've got a lot more of those types of playgrounds, which has required a lot more maintenance, but I can provide a bit more of a breakdown for the elected members as required.
Yes, Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So, as going off your feedback, Director Bowe, so the nature-based playgrounds have more maintenance costs applied to them as opposed to the traditional playgrounds that we have. Is that correct?
Director Bowe.
That's our experience, Councillor Bain, yes. I should add also that that is balanced somewhat by the fact that we have reduced our maintenance costs on our older, 15, 20-year-old playgrounds, the traditional style, but certainly we are experiencing a higher degree of maintenance costs with the new style.
And yes, Councillor Bain.
Just one more, Mr. Mayor. 18C, the positive variance of $2.75 million in employee costs. How many positions are currently being filled by labour hire employees? Thank you.
CEO, are you able to answer that, or Director Driscoll?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll need to take that question on notice and bring that back to you.
We'll have an answer for you by next Tuesday, obviously before that. Any other questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move to the next item, which is 7.4 on your agenda this evening. The responsible officer is Mr. Warren Bowe, the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. It's IE 009 of 24. The title of the report being Review of Policy ET 525, Streetscape and Park Management, Trees in Streets, Thoroughfares and Parks. The officer's recommendation appears on screen. It also appears on page 50 of tonight's agenda. Any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Kunza.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The previous policy provided scope for the removal of trees that weren't appropriate for the location to be removed. However, that's not in this new policy. How does the city propose to deal with removal of trees that might have a negative environmental biodiversity impact? Examples include species declared as environmental weeds by the DBCA or DPIRD, or any other unforeseen situation where a tree species has a negative environmental consequence.
Director Bowe, how will we tackle that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I may ask our Acting Manager of Parks and Environment, Mr Pickard, to answer that question, or our Service Lead, Glenn Williams.
Gentlemen,
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Williams, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Kunza, the city would take each tree on its merits, and there would need to be information that was supported that the fact that the tree was providing a detrimental impact to the surrounding environment. The officers would assess that information and then make a decision based upon that to the best outcome for the community and the environment.
Councillor Kunze, yes.
But can I just confirm, given that the policy outlines the specific reasoning why the city will entertain removal of a tree, should that not be included within the policy?
Mr Williams?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the city does base its decisions on evidence, and as I've mentioned before, we would weigh up each application based upon its merits. The idea of the policy is not to exclude removals of trees, but to make informed decisions which provide the best outcomes.
Director Bowe, you want to just add a little bit of context to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I certainly take Councillor Kunz's point, and I would reference a recent decision we made upon reconsidering a request to have a specific tree removed, and I think clause 710, where a review of a prior decision regarding a tree removal will be considered if there's been a substantial change in the circumstances relevant to the original decision. I think consulting with the DPIRD or Department of Primary Industries or the DBCA, the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, as to whether or not certain trees or other vegetation may adversely impact the biodiversity or other relevant elements of the policy would be introduced at that clause.
Thank you. Councillor Kunze?
Yeah, thanks for that. Just with respect to the implementation of the Halliwell formulation for calculating tree value, with trees that need to be removed as part of development, obviously that would happen if there was no other alternative that the tree would need to be removed. When would it be communicated that the proposed development would incur a potentially higher cost with removal of a tree?
Director?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the feedback to the applicant would be during the development application assessment. Councillor Kunze?
And just with respect to the calculated value, do residents or any impacted person, do they actually have the potential to appeal the calculation or seek independent assessment, given that some of the part of the formulation could be, I guess, subjective?
Director? Evaluations?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr Mayor, and I don't recall there's anything that does enable that appeal right within the current draft. Councillor Kunze, I'm happy to take that offline and give that some further consideration.
Thank you. And just lastly, with the information provided as part of the tree retention hierarchy, last year with Mr Johnson, I provided some commentary around providing education to people who request pruning of a tree, and the fact that whilst it might provide a short-term benefit, it could have potential medium to longer-term negative consequences as it incentivises growth. But the document actually talks about pruning as an option. I just wonder whether we should provide some commentary with respect to educating on what pruning does.
Director?
Yeah, I'm happy to include that information, Mr Mayor. Absolutely.
Thank you, councillors. Director, I've just got a couple of questions myself. One was just in relation to the inspection fee mentioned in paragraph 20 of the report, talks about the introduction of an inspection fee. It's obviously further says in the same paragraph that the fee will be included in the next review of the city schedule of fees and charges. I'm just wondering, in relation to that, there was some dreadful press recently about a local government that was had a fee of many thousands of dollars for inspections and around construction sites. When will council be, why were we not able to put a figure or a provisional figure in the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think some of the costs are really site-specific, dependent on the size of the tree, the location of the tree, and some of the other factors that would contribute to the costs. We often engage independent arborists as a city, and the costs can range from a few $100s to a few thousand. So I think we'd await council's decision on the policy first and foremost, and I think there would be sufficient time to brief elected members and include a fee as part of the budget adoption.
Thank you. And just in relation to paragraph 30, it mentions a number of local governments, only 7, I think it mentions, that have actually introduced a similar fee based on the amenity value. Can I be told which of the 7 councils that have actually introduced that? Director, if you don't know, would Mr. Williams perhaps know?
I don't think Mr. Williams is indicating that he is aware, Mr. Mayor, but we can provide that information in the AB comment in this report prior to council.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question in relation to this item? Councillor Bone?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to confirm with the city, should this policy be endorsed by council, right? At some stage in the future, should Metronet wish to conduct some works which would require trees to be removed from city-maintained land, will the government agency, or i.e. Metronet, be required to pay the tree's amenity value as well? Thank you.
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I might have to defer to Director Bride in relation to the development application process, which is the process integral to the policy by which the Heliwell valuation and the costs of removal of the tree would apply, the mechanism by which we would apply that to the developer. So I might just have to ask Director Bride for some comment on that.
Director Bride, would that be included as an approved development?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor. So obviously Metronet has already lodged its application in relation to the tree removal process. We would advise, so we would list it as an advice note if it came in as a DA, to advise the applicant that the city has a policy in relation to removal of trees, and they would have to then comply with that requirement.
Just a question, in relation to something similar to that. In the new draft policy, section 8, subsection 3B, talks about the compensation for the loss of a community asset equivalent to the amenity value of the tree will also be required to be paid when a tree is removed as part of an approved development. Does that cost also equally apply to the City of Canning for a development undertaken by us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see any reason why our Parks and Environment people wouldn't levy a fee on the broader organisation to recompensate the city for any loss of tree associated with this development, but it isn't covered in the policy at the moment. Mr. Littleton,
CEO.
I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an interesting point. It's fair to say, though, that council is actually contributing a substantial amount to the reforestation and is planting many numbers of trees to compensate. So, I think those are the sorts of things that it would seek to balance.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor, I've just got another question here, just in relation to removal of live trees. 7 subsection 2 talks about those matters will be dealt with by the CEO, but the applicant can specifically request that council consider the request. And I just wondered whether when residents come to us asking for a live tree to be removed, whether they'll be informed at that time that they do have the right to take the matter directly to council if they so wish. Is that something that we'll be telling them in writing?
Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor. However, we will apply the hierarchy as a preference, and we will seek to negotiate with the proponent an outcome that's acceptable, but we will also be ensuring that they're aware that the matter, upon request, could be considered by this council.
And I just had one final query. Thank you for your patience. Section 6. 4 speaks to tree pruning, and I'm really pleased to see that pruning can occur in relation to a whole range of matters, obviously with some restrictions. At 4A, it talks about at the request of an adjoining property owner, trees will be pruned by the city to improve solar access where it can be demonstrated that renewable energy device installations are being negatively impacted by the city's tree assets, and that they predate the planting of the relevant street or park tree. And I'm just wondering about the reasonableness of that, for people who move into homes and have a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old tree out there. I mean, I do understand the intent of that, but, renewable energy is just as important to everybody at the moment, and I think we need to strike a balance. I'm just wondering whether that final restriction there that the asset must predate the planting of the relevant tree or park tree, whether that's really a reasonable restriction to put in there, and whether the city might be able to, give some consideration to having a think around that. I just find that incredibly restrictive. Did I read that right? Is that what it would mean?
My reading of that, Mr Mayor, just to be clear, is that the renewable energy device installation had to predate the tree.
Is that right, Mr Williams? You're shaking, you're nodding. You are?
That's correct, Mr Mayor.
Would it be true to say, though, that for most of the street assets in the City of Canning, considering how old the City of Canning is, many of those would have been planted and have matured well before renewable technologies were put on roofs of houses? Would that also be true?
There is a reasonable number of mature trees. The majority of them don't adversely impact renewable energy devices at this stage, but we'd be happy to look at those on a case-by-case basis. But yes, it is intended to precede the tree.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. If there's no further questions on that, we'll move on to IE 010 of 24, proposed new parking restrictions for the Lake Street extension, which is in Cannington. The recommendation is on page 76 of the agenda and is also on screen. Councillors, do you have any questions in relation to the Lake Street proposed parking restrictions? No? Councillor Bain, yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is the set down and pick up, the proposed area, those bays, are they primarily to service the temporary bus station or Seven Oaks College?
Director?
Are they, sorry, Councillor Bain, they're the ones on the southern side of Lake Street? Yeah, that is primarily to service the temporary bus station.
Yes, Councillor Bain.
Given that, when the temporary bus station does close, what's going to be our approach after that?
Director Bowe.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I might just ask our service lead, Ryan Gibson, to answer that question. I don't know the answer.
Mr Gibson, you able to provide a response to the question asked by Councillor Bain? Did you hear the question? You did, thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. The intention is when the metro networks are complete and the stations reopened, that will review parking in that area, including parking on Lake Street. So that'll be included in the broader review at that stage.
Thank you. Councillor Bain, anything further? Nothing? Thank you. Thank you, councillors. In the absence of any further questions, we'll move on to the next item. The next item is IE 011 of 24. It's in response to a notice of motion NOM 004 of 23 in relation to Pinetree Gully Road in Willetton. It was in response to an incident that occurred last year. Do I have any questions in relation to that item? It appears on page 84 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Councillor Secon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, thank you for this comprehensive report addressing some of the daily challenges around Willetton Precinct. I noticed that beside brighter lighting, all other remedies are subject to funding. There are two sources of funding mentioned, the Black Spot State and Black Spot Federal. What would be the anticipated timeline for the funding to come through?
Director, the question of funding.
We would make the submissions as part of the next round of funding, Mr Mayor, which would hopefully come into the budget next financial year.
Thank you, Councillor Secon.
Thank you, Director Bowe. Just one other question. Will the grant application be, this is in reference to the office's recommendation on page 84, would the grant application be put in after the CEO engages with the relevant stakeholders, or will this be done concurrently?
Director, and I'll just get some clarification on that funding. Was it 25, 26 or 26, 27?
It's certainly not 24, 25, Mr Mayor, it's 25, 26. That the funding would come in, but the consultation would be undertaken in preparation of the grant submissions. Councillor Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions in relation to Pinetree Gully Road? Councillor Ben Kunze, and congratulations on 10 years in local government this year too.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Just with respect to the City of Canning's cycling and walking plan and the imminent review, given the high number of vehicles, bicycles and pedestrians that use this part of Pinetree Gully Road, wouldn't it make more sense to identify roads such as this to turn into safe, active streets or something similar to try to improve safety rather than what the current plan has and look for safe streets to make safer? Is this not a good example of what we can turn into a safe,
There's
active
a
street?
terrific example over at Gibbs Street in...
I wasn't trying to be particular with that, but just we would see immediate improvements if we turn this into something similar, noting it probably doesn't qualify for state government funding, but can we not look at opportunities such as this to improve?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Certainly they are expensive exercises, as this council is well aware, but I will ask Mr Gibson to respond in relation to the recommendation in the road safety inspection about the closure of the street.
Mr Gibson, you heard the question from Councillor Kunze. Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as part of the road safety inspection, one of the recommendations was to look at a school streets type proposal, which was to close a section of Pinetree Gully for the morning and afternoon drop-off pickup times. There's a number of probably issues with that in terms of redirecting traffic, which can cause a redistribution. There's bus zones, so there's a number of other conflicting issues that we need to manage as part of that. We have included one of the recommendations to evaluate the proposed treatments, the traffic calming treatments and speed zone changes in 3 to 5 years, with the intention of potentially looking at a similar type arrangement of a shared zone or something along those lines in the future if the treatments we're proposing don't achieve the speed reductions and the place values that we're trying to achieve in the Willetton Precinct Plan.
Councillor Kunze, have you got anything further up? Thank you. Anyone else have a question in regards to Pinetree Gully Road? Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. We'll move on to the next item, which is IE 012 of 24. It's the Omnibus Parking Report, Formalisation of Temporary Parking Restrictions. The officer's recommendation appears on page 102 of the agenda. It's a long list of temporary parking controls and they, or most of them, are on screen right now. Any questions in relation to that final item? Yes, Councillor Hearn, thank you.
So following on from the member of the public's question earlier today, there has been some concern expressed by the public about the enforcement of parking zones and particularly around schools and how if it's not effectively enforced, it becomes ineffective. So my question would be, I think for Director McQuaid, who manages the Ranger service, do we actually have a scheduled annual enforcement schedule or is it ad hoc?
Director McQuaid, how do we respond to issues around schools?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor Hall. We do have an active program. I'd need to find out if it's a schedule as such. So we do try and have our community safety officers on, but obviously we don't have enough community safety officers to be in every school district across it. So it's a rotating basis. But I'm happy to come back to you with further information on that. When we do receive complaints, then we obviously are quite active in that space for a period of time whilst we're working through it with community.
Thank you. Councillor Hearn?
So would it be fair to say that when you get complaints, you kind of focus on an area more? Is it possible to say, like, roughly how many times a year the Rangers might focus on issuing infringements at each school? Is there any kind of indicative number?
I'll have to take that on notice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item? Thank you, councillors. We'll move through the rest of the agenda, and that's pretty much us for the night. At item 7.5, the Directorate of Dr. Sarah McQuaid, the Director of Customer and Community. There are no reports. Item 8 notices a motion for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting. At item 8, there are none. Urgent business at item 9, there is none on the agenda for this evening. Confidential matters at item 10, similarly, there are none. And at item 11, closure, there being no further business this evening, I do now declare the agenda briefing closed, the time being 6:29 p.m. And I thank everyone sincerely for their attendance this evening. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming along. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Still on? Councillor Tuchek? Did I get you to introduce our... Are we still recording? Tell us a little bit about why we're all dressed in brown and beige tonight. Or most of us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we still recording? No, it's okay. We dressed in brown this evening to support WA guide dogs. It takes over 2 years and $50,000 to train just one dog. So all of us have committed and donated this evening. And also we're supporting RSPCA WA. And their aim is to keep communities free from animal cruelty. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thanks, councillors and staff, for making an effort this evening. And we'll continue to do that at our agenda briefings each month. And again, my thanks to Councillor Tuchek for raising awareness for the RSPCA and also for Guide Dogs WA, two wonderful charities. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, and good night.